mention, a lot of things going on. So days have been very busy. We have a calendar coming out. We have a lecture next week. We have the weekly classes on Thursday. This week is going to be Thursday night. We're learning about Saul. Then we have a lot of programs coming the next month before the high holidays, and then the high holidays. Things are busy. I'm going to send out a video. I saw this amazing video this morning. In Israel, there was a guy, a businessman, and the Rebbe had somehow told him in the late 80s, early 90s, that if he searches in Israel, he will find precious stones. There were no known precious stones in Israel at the time. So it's on Fox News. It's on Fox. Fox News produced it, a documentary, short documentary. How basically this guy searched like a madman. He believed the Rebbe, the Rebbe told him roughly where it is. He said in Jewish tradition, that's where it is. And all the scientists refuted him, and he kept doing it. Anyways, only in 2020, they discovered precious stones that don't exist anywhere else in the world. In Haifa, Israel, in the valley there. His family, obviously, his daughter in the video says that he was a businessman, and it was embarrassing for him. He was a successful businessman, and hear all his friends saying, hey, you're throwing all this money away, And he was like, no, the Rebbe said that there's going to be stones, there's going to be precious stones. Eventually in 2019, 2020, they found them, and they're one-of-a-kind stones in the whole world. The only other place their composition exists is on meteorites. And he died. They had to get, licensing and mining rights and everything. He died in the process. He just got older and died. But his kids have a really successful business with incredible one-of-a-kind jewelry from Israel, which is Israeli jewelry that, it's the only gems from Israel that you can ever find. So it's a pretty fascinating video I just saw this morning,
Did they give a name to the stone?
Well, they did. When you study stones, so when we go to the jewelry store and we say, I'd like a ruby, oh, here's a ruby. But really, there's many different types of rubies and many different types of composition. And there's, some of them are, I remember reading about one of them, it's extremely rare type of ruby in Utah and everything like that. So I don't know exactly, I don't know gems so well, but a lot of times you'll have multi-colors, rubies, sapphires, emeralds, and they're essentially the similar composition. But anyways, you could see the video. I think their company is called Holy Gems. Holy Gems. So I'll put the video on WhatsApp after. Fascinating video. And his faith, first of all, the Rebbe's faith in the prophecies of the land of Israel, and his faith in the Rebbe, despite so many years of, the Rebbe said it's not metaphysical, it's literal. And for so many years he was searching, making his life's missions to find these gems, and he eventually found them. It's pretty fascinating. So today's Rambam, we're going to talk about malaches. The Torah says you can't work on Shabbos, but it doesn't specify what is considered work. So Jewish tradition, going back to Moses, says whatever they did in the tabernacle, to build the tabernacle, to process the tabernacle, that is considered work. And the Mishnah enumerates 39 types of work. These are called the 39 malachos, 39 types of biblical work. How strict are these 39 types of work? So the malachos that you are not allowed to do, the work that you're not allowed to do, you can get stoned, death penalty if you do them. If we'll talk about it. If you're warned and there are witnesses, you get stoned. If you're not, you can get cut off from God. Your soul gets cut off from God. So in the olden days, that would cause someone to die after 50, 60 years old. And it was a really horrible thing. The Tanya says that nowadays, because we're so non-spiritual, a lot of the spiritual punishments don't manifest in us. In the olden days, it's like, hey, don't break Shabbos. Look what happened to that guy, Nowadays, and it's actually out of God's kindness that, He knows that we wouldn't be able to keep things so well. So a lot of the spiritual punishments are gone because we're less spiritually sensitive in order that we can survive and we can fulfill our mission in the world. Anyways, but if you do them on purpose, you get stoned or cut off from God. If you do it by accident, you have to give a sacrifice. It's hard to imagine every time you break Shabbos by accident. You have to go to the temple. Next time you're at the temple, you got to slaughter an animal on an altar. But you know what? That prevented people from breaking Shabbos. Now, in the concept of malachos, there's avos and toldos. Avos literally means fathers, and toldos means children. So what we're going to see now is in the Mishkan, there's 39 general rules, 39 things that they did in the Mishnah you're not allowed to do. And then there is the art of deciphering what that extends to. The extension is the kids, so to speak. And we're going to go through in great detail now. But you have different laws in the Mishkan that they did something and you're not allowed to do it because it is similar to what they did in the Mishkan. There's the literal action they did in the Mishkan and the similar action. That's the fathers and the children. How many are there? There are 40 minus 1. So there are 39 jobs they did in the Mishkan. I'm going to go through them very fast because I'm going to go through them very fast because we're going to go through them in detail later. There's plowing. You're not allowed to plow on Shabbos, not allowed to plant, not allowed to harvest, not allowed to gather, not allowed to thresh, not allowed to winnow, you're not allowed to separate, you're not allowed to grind, you're not allowed to sift, you're not allowed to knead, you're not allowed to bake, you're not allowed to shear wool from an animal, from a sheep. You can't dye, you can't brush it, to smooth it out. You can't make it white, you can't brush it, you can't dye it a different color. You can't put it on. So now we have this whole thing, making a heddle and putting a what do you call it through? I can't remember the name of the shuttle through. You can't set up all those things and setting up the ways of weaving. You can't weave. You can't spin. You can't tie. You can't untie. You can't sew. You can't tear. You can't build. You can't destruct. You can't finish off a job. You can't trap. You can't slaughter. You can't skin. You can't work the leather. You can't work it the next way of, and we'll see all these different things later. You can't cut it. You can't write. You can't erase. You can't scrape a line into it. You can't burn, light a fire. You can't put out a fire, and you can't take out from one domain to a private domain to a public domain. Those are all 39. You got them. You memorized them. Believe it or not, kids memorize them in school. There's even a kids book we have that goes through them for kids. Pretty remarkable. The best book on Shabbos is the gray ones up there in the corner. They go through in great detail all 39 malachis and what they mean to us today. But we're going to go through the Rambam. All of these 39 things we mentioned are called the fathers. So what does that mean? It means, let's say you have the first one is plowing. If you plow, or you dig, or you make a trench, that is what plowing is. That's the action of plowing. So if you have done that work on Shabbos, every single one, because what is the action of plowing? It's digging, right? That's what the action of plowing is. It's digging. There are different ways of digging. So those are all the father one. Similarly, if you plant, let's say you plant, or let's say you take a sapling and you plant the sapling versus planting a seed, or let's say what they used to do in certain vineyards. What you do is you take the vine and you stick it back into the ground, etc., etc. Or if let's say you prune things. So we just were in New York. We went to Brooklyn Botanical Gardens. We saw the bonsai trees. So right, you have to. We read that you have to prune the roots and also prune the leaves to make it. So if you prune something for it to work better, those are considered planting, and they're all one thing. You're all intending to grow something. Similarly, if you harvest, doesn't matter what type of thing you're harvesting. And I'm just gonna, goes through everything has a different process of harvesting. You have different, wheat produce, grain produce, grapes, dates, olives, figs. All those, even though you're doing different things, you're doing the same thing. The of malacha, the origin of that is you are taking something away from its life source. Okay, so those are the examples. The Rambam was trying to specify here that even though, let's say, they harvested wheat and grapes, harvesting the av malacha, the general type of work is a general idea, a general action of cutting off things from their source. Similarly, whether you're plowing, if you're digging a hole, that's considered plowing because you're digging a hole for a benefit. What is a tolda? So that is what the Rambam says is av. I just want to tell you that is slightly contested, or maybe not even slightly, by other rabbis, how to define an av malach and how to define a tolda. The Talmud goes in great detail in the tractate of Shabbos.
Tolda is the subcategory?
Tolda is a subcategory, literally meaning a child. It's a child. It's an offshoot. Now what we'll see is the offshoots aren't rabbinic. They are also biblical. However, there is a difference, what we'll say soon. A child, a offshoot, a tolda, is something which is similar to the father. Let's say you cut a vegetable So we mentioned one of the father malachas is to grind it. You're not allowed to grind on Shabbos. You're not allowed to grind something. So let's say medicine, or you're not allowed to grind. So now let's say you take a vegetable and you dice it very, very small to cook it. Say I didn't put it in a grinder. I diced it very small to cook it. Right? So that is a tolda. It's similar to the father one. This is similar to grinding because you're grinding it into very small. You're taking it and putting it in a machine, and you're using a mechanism to make it very small. And here you're also making it very small. And if you do anything similar, this is teichen. So if you dice something, that could be the same as grinding. Similarly, if you take a tongue of metal, this is what they call metal, and you rub it in order to take from its dust, that's similar to grinding, even though it's not the mechanism. Grinding in the Mishkan was grinding wheat, right? You grind wheat, make flour, but anything which you're making to powder. So we will mention, the reason why you're not allowed to take medicine on Shabbos, unless you are feeling pretty sick, is because the rabbis were worried you're going to grind. They're going to grind. Back in the old days, they had to grind medicine. And even though we don't necessarily grind medicine nowadays, sometimes we do. In the olden days, it was very common. So the rabbi said, no medicine unless you really need it on Shabbos.
Really?
Similarly, if you take milk and you put in rennets of an animal, you put in rennets, doesn't matter what type of rennets, in order to make it congeal into cheese, right? This is, and now, so what you're going to do is you put it in, and then you take the whey out, right? You take the cheese out of the whey. So this is butter. You're separating, right? You're separating. You're not allowed to separate. Now, even though in the Mishkan, what was separating? They would you harvest wheat, etc., you sift it, you winnow it, and everything. But there's still little pieces of things you need to take out. That is not allowed on Shabbos. You're not allowed to take the bad from the good on Shabbos. So now, let's say I'll give you an example. Let's say you cook a whole fish. Lately, I've gotten into cooking whole fish. Let's say you cook a whole fish. You're not allowed to take the bones out on Shabbos, unless we'll see later. But let's say you're preparing the dish, you want to put it on the table, so you take all the bones out. That's not allowed, because you're not allowed to take, when you're making wheat, when you're making flour, you're not allowed to take out the bad pieces, because that's what they did. So here also, what we're saying is, you're taking out the bad part of the cheese, right? You're taking out the bad part when you make it. So now, what's going to cause is, okay. So now, let's say you make it into cheese. You're also not allowed to make cheese, because cheese is building, right? Building in the Mishkan is talking about putting out the Mishkan, but you're creating. What is building? Creating a new substance, a new thing, right? Of course, we don't create, right? So if you make cheese, you're not allowed to make cheese on Shabbos. Anyone who gathers different parts and sticks them together, this is building, right? So even though in the Mishkan we're talking about putting up the tabernacle's walls, that's building, that applies to a lot of things. And similarly, every single malacha, they all have the general, the father, and the offshoots. And what you need to do is you need to think a lot about the father malacha. And when you think about that a lot, and you internalize it, and you internalize exactly what you're doing, you can determine if there's an offshoot or not. So this is long in the Talmud, going through the cycle of the rabbis arguing, is this a malacha, is this work or not? There are incredible amounts of things on Shabbos like this. And we are actually going to go through them. We're going to go through each malacha and go through a lot of the offshoots. And then, rabbis nowadays, they also need to determine what does the offshoot extend, right? So you'll have, let's say, turning on the light nowadays. In the olden days, you're not allowed to make a fire. Turning on a light, am I really making a fire? Well, what if it's the LED light? What if it's this? What if it's that? So these are all the discussions nowadays if the origin law, the father law applies. Okay, someone who does one of the fathers or one of the children on purpose, so it doesn't matter, they're both actually just as strict. Whether you build a tabernacle in the desert or you make cheese, if you do it on purpose, you will be cut off from God. Now, again, nowadays we don't really get cut off from God. Nowadays we probably don't even know how to do anything on purpose. We don't really appreciate Shabbos. But for the fact that Torah tells us that this is the potential punishment, we can learn how important it is to God to keep it. If witnesses see you do it and they say, hey, don't do that, and you say, I'm doing it anyways, then you get a court case, capital punishment. If they could find a way that you didn't do it on purpose, or maybe you didn't have knowledge or whatever it is, or maybe they didn't warn you well enough, then they would save you. But the purpose of these punishments is to know how severe God. All punishments in the Torah were very rare. The Beis Din, it says in the times of the Second Temple, it says, or times of the Temple, it says if they would kill one person in capital punishment every 70 years, that would be considered a bloody Sanhedrin, a bloody court. Because the rabbis are very smart, they always could figure out a loophole to save him. And one of the rabbis in the Talmud, I believe Rabbi Akiva, he said, if I was there, he was after the destruction, he said, if I was there, I would have saved that person. It wouldn't happen. It wouldn't happen. Because he felt that he had the knowledge of being able to find a loophole. But we can see from the punishments how strict, how important it is to God. B'shogeg, if you do it by accident, you have to do a chatas. A chatas is a sin offering. So if it's the same punishment, whether you do the father law or the offshoot law, what is the difference between them? Ein b'nein hefresh. There's no difference between them. They're both equally severe. The only thing is, with regard to the sacrifice, if you do a father law and a offshoot law, a toldes law, on accident, or if you do the same thing many, many times by accident, if you do, if you do a toldes, if you do many fathers laws, you do a bunch of them, you have to do a sacrifice for each one that you broke. So if you cook, dye, sew, everything, you have to bring that many sacrifices. However, let's say you do a father and an offshoot law at one time, you only bring one sacrifice. So let's say you do construction on Shabbos, and then you also make cheese. How many sacrifices do you bring? One. Because the making cheese is a problem of building. That's the malacha of building, right? So if you do multiple fathers, you have to bring multiple sacrifices. If you do a father and offshoot, that's the only difference between fathers and offshoots. In other words, they're all death penalty. They're all extremely strict. Okay. For example, the Rambam says, you plowed, planted, and harvested on Shabbos, and you forgot it was Shabbos. You woke up in the morning, you forgot it was Shabbos. You need to bring 3 sacrifices, right? And if you do all 40 minus 1, you forgot that all these things, you need to bring a sacrifice from each law that you broke. However, let's say you ground, and then you diced, and then you scraped metal, as we said before. So you did 3 types of grinding. You only bring 1 sacrifice because you did a father and its offshoots. So if you do a father and its offshoots, and this is all by accident. If you do it on purpose, well, you can't die more than once, right? You can't be capital punished more than once, so then that's obvious. But if you did it by accident, Mendel, please stop that. Mendel, if you do it by accident, if you do multiple father laws, the precise things they did in the Mishkan, the precise action, then you will get, you will have to bring multiple sacrifices if you did it by accident. In other words, by accident means either you didn't know it wasn't allowed, or you didn't know it was Shabbos.
So you really had to go to a Rav to figure out what your punishment is.
If you wanted to know how, well, correct. Well, so Shabbos is something which is a lot of detail. Shabbos is a really a lot of details. If you do many jobs, many malachis, and they're all like one thing, you only if you do many avis malachis and they're all the same av, you only have to bring 1 sacrifice. For example, let's say you planted seeds. Let's say you have this great orchard, farm, garden. So you plant seeds, and then you plant saplings, and then you take vines. Vines is called maamer. So what you do with vines is you grow a little tree, so to speak, and then you go and you extend it and you put it down, and then it grows out again, right? And that's how you make a vineyard. And then you go and you help things grow, you prune them, everything like that, all in one day. You only bring one sacrifice because those are all categorized as planting in the Torah. So if you do, again, so just summarize. If you do multiple father ones, which are multiple of the 39 that are listed, that we listed, then you would need to bring a sacrifice for each one. If you do a father and an offshoot, then you only bring one. And if you do the same father, even though they are different in perception, but they're really essentially the same thing, like you're planting all the different ways of planting, then you bring one sacrifice. All right, any questions? Yeah.
In the absence of a temple, would we be bringing offerings?
You can't bring offerings, so that's a problem. There's a whole question if when Mashiach comes, well, we have to bring a lot of offerings. Maybe we'll have to bring a lot of offerings. There was a rabbi in the Talmud who used to write down every time he sinned. And he said, I need to keep record. Mashiach's going to come. We need to bring offerings. Now, the truth is we sin nowadays, and we can't bring offerings. And offerings were not a punishment. They were a gift. They were a gift. They absolve you of punishment. So, actually, the Alter Rebbe, in one of the parts of Tanya, it's called the Letters about Teshuvah, Letters about Repentance. He goes through, he says, that's why Jews would fast. The Arizal talks about fasting, giving tzedakah, strengthening mitzvahs. Like the best way to repent on something is to fix it in a way that you'll never do it again, right? So let's say, like a lot of times people, Orthodox Jews will make a mistake with kosher. So what they'll do is they'll say, not only I'm not going to make that mistake anymore, but I'm going to adhere to more kosher. In other words, like, let's say they'll say, I made a mistake because I was lax, so I'm going to find unrelated ways to be more strict and show that kosher is important to me. Or Shabbos, or anything, a way to do teshuvah. The proper way of doing teshuvah is to, we mentioned in today's Hayom Yom, there's two ways to heal. One way to heal is you fix the sickness. The other way is you fix everything. So teshuvah ideally should be you try to adhere closer to God in many ways in order not to be lax in one way. Yeah.
If as you said, the death penalty was very seldom used, and that the rabbi could find essentially a way out or a way of avoiding that, is the underlying assumption that if you actually understood what you were doing, you wouldn't do it?
Well, so, I'll tell you in a second.
That's what it seems like. In other words, you might have done something even intentionally, but you really couldn't comprehend what you were doing. You really didn't understand.
So, if you would imagine being in a world, and this is very important to know, if you would imagine being in a world where, you might have the same thing. We didn't. Let's put it on the next one. Oh yeah, that's the right one.
Is this the right one?
Yeah. If you would imagine being in a world where there was death penalty and then you probably wouldn't make the mistakes, right?
Right.
And you would be conscious.
Yes.
So nowadays, almost all Jews can't really do things. There's people theorize almost all Jews can't really do things on purpose because we don't have such a punishment system. If we live in Israel, we're living in a Jewish community, and everybody knows that this is going to happen, so then you can be held responsible. But at the same time, God took away the rabbinical court. He took away that. So nowadays, when we keep Shabbos, or we do any mitzvah, in a certain sense, it's at a higher level, because it's totally our choice. You won't see any reward or punishment for keeping Shabbos. You will see reward keeping Shabbos. The Torah says a lot of Jewish reward is either in afterlife, or when Mashiach comes, or it's in long term. Like, if you keep one Shabbos fully, it might not be easy for you. You might not even enjoy it. But after a few years of keeping Shabbos, you won't want to go back. And that's the way it is. You'll enjoy it. So nowadays, when we keep Shabbos, it's an absolute gift, because we won't get death penalty, we won't have sacrifices or anything like that.
Well, the death penalty is one thing, but I think being cut off from God It's more severe.
Well, so believe it or not, you're actually right. And give me 1 second.
How you doing?
Okay. Actually, I'm pretty good. You know, once you realize putting your cat down is for its own good, you know, or not.
It is, you know.
I mean, it's kind of selfish to keep her alive.
So not to go into it too much, but death penalty is something which the Talmud says death penalty is better than being cut off from God, because when you sin really badly, the death penalty is not a punishment, it's a cleansing. So you die, and now your soul is clean of the sin. So like your soul is freed up from the sin. So the malady is in your soul when it's in the body, and now through going through the God's death penalty, it's actually God's kindness. Your soul no longer has that malady. On the other hand, if your soul is cut off, then your soul does have that malady, right? So actually, yes, death penalty is not a way to punish the person. It's actually a way to save the person. That's what we believe.
So,
Yeah.
Then, if they really believe that, why not do the death penalty?
We only do the death penalty when God tells us to, because in other words, the death penalty isn't something which is like, are Jews pro death penalty? No. We have very specific ways of doing it that God gave us that we can do in certain circumstances.
Yeah,
Like,
but we're saying we're looking for loopholes not to.
because if we can find a loophole, then that's not the way that he can be cleansed. That's not the proper way he's meant to be cleansed.
choose life, choose good.
Well, so the Torah tells us to try not to give him death, to try to save him. And that means, so from the person's perspective, if ultimately he gets death penalty, that's his cleansing. If not, then he has to find another way of cleansing. So that's the way it works. So it's very interesting, but that's in the fundamental beliefs of reward and punishment. Okay, let's go. So we're holding at number 3. Number 3 is actually, I didn't mark it, but
My notes only go to the end of 1.
we did 2
But
before Neil.
I might have missed one,
Give me a second.
because
2.
I missed some classes. So-
Yeah, let me just find out. So furthermore,
Okay. That's in 2 then. Unless there's more than one for me.
for some reason I don't have 3 here. I don't have 3. I have to print 3. Give me a second. Okay.
I don't have 3.
Yeah, somehow it didn't print. Let me just find why not. The fourth Lubavitcher Rebbe said, the reason for this is because there will be no more impurity in the world. Death comes from impurity. So, we said what happened at the beginning of the world. Adam was created. He was created to protect the garden and do positive things in the garden. And what happened is he got a choice. He made the wrong choice. He brought impurity into himself. So God said, I don't want the impurity to last forever. So now Adam's going to die. Now, he didn't die that day, right? He didn't die that day. He let him live many, many more years. But his life was no longer infinite level. It was no longer pure infinite. He had to bring death. And the reason why God put death into him was he was worried that maybe he'd eat from the tree of life and sustain evil in the world, right? So that's what we explained a while ago. And then we explained further, we said that actually death is actually impurity. And when you sin, that is the cause of death. We explained, we said God usually gives us life. God is source of life, and he gives us life if we're face to face. If we sin, we get negative energy. Things which are disconnected from God are finite. They have negative energy, so to speak. They are, and they're essentially death because they're finite. Evil is finite. So when Adam sinned, he essentially absorbed finite energy, deathly energy, which is disconnected from God in a revealed way. And that caused spiritual death for him, which caused him to die. So that's what we explained, and we said that's why when Mashiach comes, there will be no more evil in the world, meaning there'll be nothing that seems separate from God. Nowadays, a lot of things seem separate from God. When Mashiach comes, nothing will seem separate from God. God will be fully emanating in everything. Therefore, there'll be infinite energy in everything, and therefore there'll be no more death. That's what we explained several weeks ago. All right, now we said further. Now last week we totally changed the subject. But put very simply, death comes from impurities. Impurity is disconnection. That is what impurity is. Purity means connection with God. Impurity is disconnection. We gave a parable. We said, when I give something to David face to face, it's not about what I'm giving. It's about our connection, right? When I am giving with a grudge, what am I doing? I'm throwing it over my shoulder. So God, positive things, holy things, is they have godly connection. And therefore we see the holiness in them. Unholy things is God throwing it over his shoulder and saying, yeah, I have to have a Hitler. Okay, let him get life. But he's going to be erased from history. I have to have a Malik. I'll give them life. They have a job to do. But they're going to be erased. Because so it's the same thing with us. When we do a mitzvah and we know we're doing the mitzvah to connect with God, we are bringing infinite energy into ourselves. But when we do a mitzvah and we say, to do this stupid thing, right? Essentially what we're doing is we're saying, God, your stuff is, your things are dumb. That's what we're doing, right? So we're not connecting to God's infinite energy in a revealed way. So a lot of prayer and Torah study and meditation in Judaism is to realize how God is the one giving us energy, and to realize that the things in the world and gifts, so to speak, that we have are not gifts on their own right. They're actually manifestations of God to us. Okay. So then we spoke in chapter 2. We said, why is it that? So why is it when Mashiach comes? We said when Mashiach comes, there'll be no more impurity. Why is it that there'll be no more impurity when Mashiach comes? What is the cause of evil ceasing to exist? So we said there'll be a very strong godly revelation. So imagine there's someone fighting God. How could he fight God? Because God's not here, right? That's how he could fight God. He doesn't feel God's here. On Tisha B'Av in the Talmud, it goes to the story of Titus. Titus goes into the Holy of Holies, he takes a prostitute and he sleeps with her on a Torah scroll, and then he goes and he stabs one of the curtains there and blood comes out. And he says, okay, finally I killed God. This is what he says. Anyways, he goes on the boat back to Rome, and suddenly big storm starts and the boat's going to sink. So he calls out, he says, hey God, you only kill people at sea. Come fight me on land like a man. So what does the Talmud say? A voice comes out of heaven and says, not only will I fight you on land, but you will be fought with a little insect. Anyways, he goes on land, a little insect comes with his nose and basically devours his brain until he becomes brain dead and dies. That's what the Talmud says. So what do we see here? How was Titus able to rebel? Because he thought God's not here. That's the only way evil can exist in the world, if it's unaware of God. If you're aware of God, then you can't fight evil. If you're fighting evil, you're obviously not truly aware of God. If you're evil and doing evil, you're not truly aware of God. It's like if someone breaks Shabbos, right? They're unaware of how important it is. By definition, they're unaware of how important it is. If they were truly aware, they wouldn't break Shabbos. That's a guarantee. So when Mashiach comes, we said God will be so revealed in the world that all evil and sin will cease to exist. So now we said that the Rebbe Marash explained, the fourth Lubavitcher Rebbe explained. He said, even though in the first and second temple God was present, and we said especially in the times of the first temple, during whose life? Abe? Where was God most present in history?
King David, Solomon.
King Solomon. We said Solomon was the best era. There was no war.
Yes.
And we said the moon was full, his era. That was the definition, because the moon, basically, if you look in Genesis, the moon had its own light like the sun. And in order for God to create the world, he took the light away from the moon. So all evil comes from darkness, comes from absence of light, right? The moon represents the cause of absence of light, right? So what does the moon do now? If he wants to take light, he has to take a little bit and work on himself. And that's similarly our service in the world. So Solomon, it says the moon was complete. It's almost like the moon always had light on it, which is a symbolic idea that in the times of King Solomon, the world, which is the world of darkness, was full of light. Godly revelation. And that's why there was peace. No one wanted to fight with Solomon because his holiness was present and tangible. We said, even though King Solomon, the whole world was at peace, because they all recognized that Solomon was king and he was God's representative, and God was so revealed in the world, it wasn't enough. Why? For two reasons. Number one, we find, one is in the maamer and one I said outside of the maamer. We find that even when the Queen of Sheba came to Israel, she didn't totally say, I'm no longer queen anymore. She went, she was queen, and she said, oh, I respect Solomon, give everything to Solomon. But after Solomon died, everything reverted back. So what does that mean? That means that the people in the world who followed Solomon, it wasn't because they had an internal change where they dedicated their life to holiness. It was an external change. In other words, we said, for example, we gave several examples, but Solomon was so great, his impact was so great, his presence was so great, that everyone wanted to changed automatically in front of him, right? Everyone changed automatically in front of him. But when he was gone, or outside of his reign, not everyone was godly. So let me just go into a little bit more. In a lot of maamerim, it talks about the difference between King Solomon, the times when Mashiach comes, and times in the desert. So if you want to make peace, there's several ways of making peace. The most common way is you fight a war, right? You fight a war, you subdue the enemy, and now you have peace. There's no more enemy. Now let's say you go and you fight a war, Russia against Ukraine, it doesn't matter where, and you subdue the enemy. So now you are sovereign over their land, their power. Did your enemy change their mind? Do they like you? Do they agree with you? No, they don't agree with you. You subdued them, right? So that's a certain type of way of subduing people. Now there's a deeper way. Let's say you go, right? Let's say you're so powerful that, let's say the president walks in the room and we're in heated argument. We'll probably all be quiet, right? Because his presence is it's the president of the United States of America. It's a very powerful presence, right? Now, let's say we're in an argument and he walks in the room and we stop the argument, right? So the president says, good, I ended this argument. Now, when the president walks out, will we argue again? Very likely, because we didn't solve the argument. So now when the president was here, did we want to argue? No, we were totally subdued. We forgot about the argument. We really did. So the same thing with King Solomon. King Solomon was such a precious, powerful, exemplary king that the whole world didn't want to fight anymore. The whole world was like, wow, God is so powerful. But were people truly committed to God? No. After King Solomon died, people went back to their idolatrous ways.
Yeah, external versus internal.
So what I wanted to say is we have external like a war. We have external like King Solomon, like the president walking in the room. That's more internal, right? The war, you can restrain me, but you can never change my mind and heart. The president walks in, our mind and heart will change. But we didn't really change. When Mashiach comes, we said, godly revelation will be so internal and so powerful that it will permeate our insides. So therefore, King Solomon, he made peace in the world because he was so powerful and so great. But he didn't change the world themselves. What people did at home didn't necessarily change. What people did in the public changed. When kings came to Israel, they said, wow, King Solomon, you're the greatest person, the greatest king in history, greatest person in history. On the other hand, when Mashiach comes, God will be revealed even in every detail of the world, even in the evil. Even in the impurity, we'll see that it's God. It will be so powerful that it will internally change everything. To the extent will be that we will no longer do evil at all. You got it? So that's what we spoke about last week. 2 weeks ago. I'm sorry.
Question about
Yeah.
Solomon.
Yeah.
Didn't Solomon sin? And could that possibly, his sin bring on?
How did Solomon sin?
Didn't he do something with idols?
So the Talmud says, it's interesting, next week and Thursday night, we're talking, 2 weeks from now, the last cast, the 3 Thursdays from now, we're going to do David and Bathsheba. And we're going to explain how the Talmud says he didn't sin. David didn't sin. The Talmud similarly says King Saul didn't sin.
He didn't.
He didn't sin. It says that basically he married too many wives. Now, the reason he married too many wives, he had married 1,000 wives, and a king is only allowed to marry 18 wives.
Solomon or David?
King Solomon. King David is a long discussion, but King Solomon, king is only allowed to marry up to 18 wives. He married 1,000. Talmud said he didn't really sin because the reason why he married them was because it gives several reasons.
Was he a glutton for
The
punishment?
treaties probably, if you married the.
Well, basically, what happened was there were a lot of people who were poor people in his time, and he knew that if he married them, then they would be supported by his wealth. So that's one reason. That's one thing that he did. The Talmud said it was a mistake because he misunderstood the Torah. Torah says black and white, and he thought that he's an exception. Also, it says that he did idolatry, but the Talmud says he didn't really do idolatry. He married so many wives. Some of them were idolatrous, and many of them were converted from other religions, and they tempted him to idolatry. So it says it wasn't actually a sin, but it was considered for a righteous person, even if they're tempted, it's considered like a sin, but it's not. There's a difference between a sin, which you get punished for, or some. So, like if you do something wrong, which isn't technically a sin, for you it could be considered spiritually a sin, but not halachically a sin. So he didn't break any laws, but he did something which, because he was tempted to do idolatry, to try it out, it was considered for Solomon to say, hey, if David gets tempted, it's not his fault. But you, Solomon, King Solomon, you're tempted, so it was considered as if it was spiritual stain, but it wasn't a legal sin. Yeah.
Is it okay to ask what?
Yeah. Only on Shabbos we don't ask questions. Yeah. Until after.
So going back, that when death exists in the world due to the impurity in the world, correct? And when Mashiach comes, the impurity will go away because we will internalize godliness.
So all death comes from sin and impurity. Impurity is disconnection from God. That's what impurity is. Holiness means connected, impurity means disconnected.
So
when Mashiach comes, God will reveal himself in a way that there is no place disconnected from God. So then anyone who's doing evil will say, why would I do evil? I'm essentially God. God is in me. Everything is God. So at that point, there'll be no disconnection, so there'll be no death.
So when the Mashiach comes, God is revealed, and we're all reconnected to God. So when we go back to Adam, before the eating of the fruit, was Adam inherently impure
So this
that caused him to...
So this is what we said. We said when God created the world, God created light and darkness. God created infinite energy and finite energy. And finite energy is impurity. It's disconnect. He connected disconnect. The problem is that disconnect, the good thing is that disconnect was outside of the garden. So what does God say? God says, serve me and guard the garden. This is literally what God says. Don't let any evil in. When they ate from the forbidden fruit, that was like Adam taking a impurity pill. He took a pill from outside the garden, something that was supposed to be outside the garden, and he allowed it in the garden. God...
So would you say that... Sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, what did I say? No, it's fine.
Would you say that the way in which God was revealed at creation, when Adam was in the garden, was a lesser revelation than when Mashiach comes?
Yes, absolutely. So if you look at, let me just take it apart another way. I don't want to talk too much about Adam because we're about 1,500 years later.
But it's but the two
2,500. Yeah, no, it's
the
connected.
two things are connected.
So basically, yes. So basically, if Adam would have done his mitzvah, right?
Right.
He would have helped vanquish the evil. He would have said, the purpose of the evil that you created was for me to commit to you. What happened was he fell. So he mixed the evil into the garden. He got kicked out of the garden, and we're still fixing that up. In other words, we live in a society where the evil is mixed with good, and we're always trying to. So the evil in the times of Adam got slightly mixed, right? And his job was to recognize it. And if he would have done that, he would have potentially, some say, he would have advanced to Mashiach era. So pre-creation, the sin, it was not as holy. It was a setup for Adam to bring more godliness into the garden.
So let me take liberty with the language a little bit. In the case of Adam, it was a second-class, second-rate revelation when compared to the revelation that will occur when the Mashiach comes, right?
Correct.
So God cheated Adam in a sense, in that God could have created Adam and his presence, God's presence, could have been revealed in a first-class way, that is, in the Mashiach way, that we're now talking about Mashiach. But God didn't do that.
Well, so let me just add.
Is that wrong to say that?
Well, there's a detail which we're glossing over. God created the world for humans to bring his presence into the world. So what God did is he created a perfect world for Adam, but it wasn't perfect enough. He said, Adam, you're created to bring me deeper into the world. So when God gave him that free choice, so it's like, what was in Hasidism, it says the world was perfectly ready for Adam to draw God into it. So Adam, how do you draw God into the world? So for Adam, he had a choice. But by making the right choice, so God intentionally didn't create it at Mashiach level. He created the pre-Mashiach level. So actually the Midrash says that Adam sinned. So what happened is the potential to be ready to draw down things into the world got all messed up. And more people sinned throughout history. And so there's, in Adam's times, there's what's called perfect and pre-perfect. The Garden of Eden is the pre-perfect.
It wasn't perfect. The garden may have been perfect, but the
correct.
revelation...
So the world was at the perfect, pre-perfect, pre-human stage. Adam was put in the world in order to complete that. He was put into the world to do his mitzvah and complete that. He didn't do the mitzvah.
God knew he would fail.
Well, God gave him a choice. He gave him a choice.
But he knew what God knows. God all
so
time.
That's a different discussion. But potentially that's what life is about. Life is about is we're set up in the perfect way, like Adam, to make the right choice. And when we make the right choice, we draw God into our perfect setup. So that's what Adam's job was. Adam's job was in the moment to make the right choice. So Adam may look back and say, "Hey, God set it up and this and that," but what Adam will say, if he's smart, is say, "From now on, I'm going to be keen on what choice I'm making. I'm going to try to do the right thing." Adam was lax then, so that was the problem. But there's a lot of discussion. It's a very vast subject. But here, what we're talking about is how Adam was in a world which was not the full godly revelation of Mashiach. And if you can imagine, just like us, we're in a world where we can bring the revelation. We can do it by choosing to do mitzvahs.
Oh, question on so the Messiah that comes will not be more righteous than, let's say, Solomon?
I'll be more well.
Or
you on Fridays. Fridays we'll talk about Messiah.
We're trying to find out how people are going to this time
internalize. Let's keep reading, and because I don't want to do. I have a meeting at 10:30. But I want to just I want to keep reading. And I'm sorry you don't have the text on number 3, and I should go get it upstairs. I just don't want to take your time, so I'm just going to do a few lines. We'll introduce the concept. So now the Rebbe that's the Rebbe Marash's maamer. Now again, the Rebbe Marash is not talking about Adam so much. He's talking about the future, and he's basing it on Adam. So if you look in the beginning, he does allude on the bottom of the footnotes. He says, "You want to know about Adam? Look over here. We're talking about just several thousand pages of stuff about Adam. Adam is a very deep story. It's a very lofty story, and it has to do with everybody. And so it is a very relevant thing. And there's probably only 1,000 different interpretations of the story. Hasidism has a very well built, thesis on it, and here we'll probably touch upon it in different places. We can ask questions after. So the Rebbe says, "Ubi or hachiluk bein hagilus." Sorry, you don't have this text, but I just bi or hachiluk bein hagilus shehaya b'mei shlema. We have to understand the difference between the times of King Solomon, the revelation of God in times of King Solomon, which we said, although it brought internal peace, it didn't bring a full internal peace, right? It basically calmed people's intellect and emotions down. But deep inside, they weren't done with non-godly ways. In the times of King Solomon, there was still a potential for people to return to the way they were before King Solomon, and they did. So we're going to understand the difference between King Solomon, between the difference King Solomon and when Mashiach comes. When Mashiach comes, the difference between Solomon and Mashiach comes is Solomon didn't totally transform the world, and therefore it let a outside energy still reside, just like Adam in a certain sense. Solomon made the world like the Garden of Eden, but deep in people's hearts, in their cities, in their homes, they were still evil. When Mashiach comes, there'll be no more evil at all. So Mavar maamer, so the fourth Lubavitch Rebbe, Rabbi Shmuel of Lubavitch, who we're quoting here, says, this is al derech hachiluk b'avodas adam ben avodas surmira l'moyas bira. The difference between turning away from evil. A Jewish person has a responsibility to turn away from evil, to help himself not do evil, to turn away from evil, right? Not talk bad things, not eat non-kosher things, not break Shabbos, etc., etc. So the Tanya says that there's two concepts. There are two types of people. A regular person is basically an animal soul. Basically, he's an animal, right? So if I say, David, you gotta eat kosher, and there's bacon and eggs here, and you like bacon and eggs, you're gonna have to turn away from it. You're gonna have to fight yourself. You're gonna have to battle yourself. You don't have to battle the bacon and eggs. They didn't do anything wrong. You have to battle yourself in your heart. That's where the battle is, right? That's called.
And the battle's brewing right now.
And that's called sur mira. Sur mira. You got to battle yourself. Now, how will you battle? Maybe you will not buy it. Maybe you'll not go to it. Maybe you'll eat something else. You'll be full. You're on a diet that doesn't allow it, etc.
You can buy fake bacon.
You buy fake bacon, whatever it is.
Turkey bacon, right?
Or vegetables.
So that is called sur mira. Then it says there's a really righteous person, really righteous people who are truly righteous in their heart. And it's important to remember, in the Tanya, basically the way we know ourselves are animals. We are essentially non-righteous. We're essentially non-righteous. And then we have a godly soul that comes into us subconsciously, and somehow God lets us know we have mitzvahs to do. So now we know the right thing. We don't want to do mitzvahs, but we're a beast inside, right? We're a beast inside. So we have to tame the beast. You're going to say, no, David, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to eat the bacon, right? So that is called sur mira. Sur mira. However, what's a tzaddik? A tzaddik is somebody who's not an animal. He's a human. He's a man. He's totally controlled by his godly soul. So does he have to stop himself from eating bacon? No. He's disgusted by bacon. Intuitively, he's disgusted by bacon. Now, Tanya says, if we feel disgusted by something non-kosher, either it's because when we were a child, it was ingrained within us, or we're fooling ourselves. In other words, in Tanya it says you shouldn't say oh, I hate not kosher, it's disgusting. Because be careful, you're not so holy, So the Rambam Rash says, what is King Solomon when Mashiach comes? The difference between sur mira and moas bira. Sur mira means turn away from evil. Moas bira means despise evil. Despise evil. So the Tanya says, so sur mira, if you turn away from evil, the Beinoni in the Tanya, he knows he has an animal soul. He's used to turning away from evil. And how do you know if you're a Beinoni? If you're a middle type of guy? The Tanya says you never sin. You're so good at turning away from it, you have it inside of you, but you're such good self-control, you never sin. That's a Beinoni. The Tanya says regular people are actually wicked. there's different types of wicked. There's wicked intentional wicked, or there's wicked, it's inborn trait that we're attracted to do bad things, or we're attracted to be selfish. That's the way humans are. Most humans are attracted to be selfish. Okay, so surmera means that you push away evil. Shemad chesara. Aval einu seinas hara b'etzem. But a Beinoni doesn't hate the evil in essence. He knows he could be attracted to it. He's very humble. He says, I know, I could fall into that. I'm going to push it away. I'm not going to think about it. I'm going to push it away no matter what. That's called sur mira. Sur mira means to turn away from evil. I'm going to train myself to turn away from evil. Even though he always pushes away, he never fails. Could he say he's holy inside? Could he say he hates evil? He can't say he hates evil. Hate is an internal emotion. The Tanya says human beings don't really have the ability to change their internal emotions. They're the way they are. In other words, so the Beinoni is someone who's so good at reminding himself that he doesn't want it, that even when he feels he wants it, he stops, changes the subject. Not only that, but deep in his heart, human beings who have animal souls, they love bad things. We're not talking about love killing people. We're talking about they love non-kosher food. They love bacon. They love this. They love that. Even when he's totally orthodox and he's in total control of himself and he's never going to touch it, deep inside, he does have potential. Human beings have to know we have potential to fall. The Tanya says this is even a fully righteous person who's in totally control of himself and never sins. Deep inside, you can remind himself there might be a love to non-kosher. Non-kosher in Tanya, by the way, means anything which is not for God. Tanya says either you're doing things for God or it's not kosher. So we're not even talking about food. We're talking about potentially indulging in watching TV, right? That's what we're talking about. This is the type of person we're talking about. For us, we got to do it slowly. It's a process because we're on the lower rung. But a really righteous person, he never sins. He only does good things. But he knows that in his heart, he doesn't hate it fully. He still has a certain level of self-control. Now I'll just finish off. Masha'in kain kishu ma'izbara, a total tzaddik. So people consider like the Rebbe a total tzaddik. He despises evil. He could never even bring himself to do it. Hainushu ma'izbara b'tachlis. He hates evil in totality. Like the godly soul. For him, it is never possible for him to fall. Because evil is off the chart for him. He's a godly soul. There's no purpose in evil for him. So now let's go through the rungs here. And the Rebbe Marash is talking about a complete tzaddik and a non-complete tzaddik. A complete tzaddik, non-complete tzaddik needs self-control. A complete tzaddik doesn't need self-control. He avoids evil like poison. He avoids non-holiness like poison. It's disgusting for him. So let's take it for us. Very low level. There's some Jews who will say, here, I like bacon, but I'm not going to eat it because it's the right thing. There's another level of Jew, one Jew will say, I like bacon, I can't hold myself back. Another one's going to say, I like bacon, but I want to do the right thing. Another Jew will say, I hate bacon, it's disgusting, I don't want to sin, right? So for the one who says, I hate it, it's more internal than the one who says, I'm going to hold myself back. So the surmera means you're controlling yourself. Mayas bira means essentially you can't bring yourself to do it. It's disgusting to you. Evil is disgusting to you. Okay, so now what we're going to say is, and I'm going to stop here because I have to go soon. What we're going to say is we're going to say the times of King Solomon put a level of control over the world. If you have a level of control over yourself, could you go back? If you have a level of control, by definition, you could go back when you're not controlled. So King Solomon revealed God in the world. That's what kings do. They reveal God in the world, but it was a level of God controlling the world. So when he controlled the world, as soon as King Solomon died, his own progeny went against it. On the other hand, when Mashiach comes, that will be God revealing himself in the world the way a totally righteous person has God revealed in himself. Evil will be despised. There'll be no place for evil. It's disgusting. So, just to finish off, I believe it was the Maggid of Mezrich, who was the Baal Shem Tov student, the Alter Rebbe's teacher. It says in the Talmud, you shouldn't say, I don't like not kosher. You shouldn't say, I don't like not kosher. You should say, I like not kosher, but God doesn't want me to eat it. It's a mitzvah not to eat it. So he says, who's the Talmud talking about? He said, you should say you don't like kosher. Because you're prone, regular humans are prone to doing the wrong thing. And therefore, if you say, I like it, but God controls me, maybe you'll spark a love for it. He says, when the Talmud says, you shouldn't say, I don't like it. You should say, I like it, but God commanded me to keep myself. That's talking about someone who's totally righteous. Someone who's totally righteous, he can say he likes it because he doesn't really like it.
So self-control is not good enough.
So when Mashiach comes, it's going to,
And we can't banish evil, I'm sorry.
Yes.
We can't banish evil from the world unless we hate evil.
Correct. So we
Even
as...
if we knew, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I don't mean to cut you.
No, so in Tanya, basically, it talks about how self-control won't hold out. Self-control doesn't hold out. You have to work internally with your mind and emotions. You have to retrain your mind and emotions. But in Tanya, it says there is a limit how much a Beinoni, a regular person, can do that, but he has to do it in order to live on a higher mode.
I mean, is that really a choice? I mean, to go from knowingly, consciously not doing something incorrect, like eating non-kosher, you do it by choice. Is it really possible to go from that to outright hatred of eating, whatever it is?
So the Tanya says it's only really righteous people, and it says that are like
You have to be
one
born
in a
that way.
generation are born that way, and they're the Moses of the generation. It says regular people, they have to do it a little bit. They have to do it a little bit. Because the Tanya says if you white knuckle through life, you won't be able to withhold. Eventually, you'll fail. So the Tanya says basically, a lot of the Tanya is about if you meditate in certain things and you know. So let's say you're just holding yourself from eating kosher. If you don't know about the spiritual meaning of kosher and what kosher means and why you're here and why your body wants non-kosher and why, if you know about that, it will be a lot more meaningful and it'll be a lot easier. So in the Tanya, basically what the Tanya is trying to do is trying to say, like, if you're withholding yourself from sinning and forcing yourself to do mitzvahs, it will only last a certain time. Because you need to bring God into your consciousness. Because if you bring God into your consciousness, you won't hate evil like a tzaddik, but you'll hate evil 10%. 10% is good. You'll hate evil in certain circumstances. You want to do the right thing in certain circumstances. So that's a lot of what the Tanya is about. The Tanya is about, actually the Tanya in the beginning says, it's about feeling God in your heart and mind. And that's what the Tanya says. The Tanya starts off, it says, the Torah says, God says, follow me because I'm close to your heart and mind. And the Tanya starts off, it says, what do you mean? God's not close to your heart and mind. We're animals. And the Tanya explains how by doing certain meditations and certain things and putting down certain values in your life, you're able to find God even in your animalistic heart, and you're able to find God. So that's the purpose of the Tanya. So now what we're saying with King Solomon is King Solomon had a sense of control. So the world wasn't fully transformed.
But
when Mashiach comes, God will transform the world internally, reprogram the world.
But in temple times, God was revealed.
Yeah, in a way.
And in Sinai, God was revealed.
Not enough. In Sinai, for sure, it wasn't enough, Talmud says. In the moment, it was great in the moment. While God was there, everyone felt it. But God didn't feel it was people didn't feel it was fully internalized in their life. They didn't feel this was the only thing life was about. When God was revealed, it was like the president walking in the room. It was like, everyone was like, wow, this is incredible, all we want to do. It was like Jews on Neil on Yom Kippur. But in order to internalize in life, it takes day by day. It takes day by day, working with yourself, day by day, bringing it closer a little bit.
Could the revelation be different in the sense that we know that a lot of people are
I don't
being
see-
destroyed?
Um,
And that